Haunted Hollers podcast, a place where your hosts, Wendy and April, discuss the creepy things that lurk in the misty shadows of the Appalachian Hills. I am, as always, the mysterious voice in the walls.
Hey everybody, I'm Wendy.
And I'm April.
Today, listeners, is an exciting day at Haunted Hollers. We have a special guest. We have Jeremy Wells. He is the editor of Carter County Times, also a fellow lover of the unexplained, of local legends all around us. He is one of the experts that we consulted in one of his articles that he wrote about the Olive Hill Poltergeist. That is from episode 1. So if you have not listened to that, make sure you go back and listen to it so that you know what we're talking about today. So we're going to turn it over to Jeremy and hear what he has to say, give us a recap, and Jeremy, it's you.
I had to raise my eyebrows a little bit at expert. I don't know. But no, it's a really, really interesting case. And there are some things that, that I have thought about, like listening to that. One of the things that you guys mentioned was the ghost image. Let me rewind a little bit. Poltergeist in general are just really interesting to me because of the whole idea of the RSPK, the recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis, which was William Roll's premise of what these are. He did not think that they were ghost in the traditional sense. It's not, the specter of the guy who raised the knockin' spirits, which is a whole other thing I want to get into, and it's not the ghost of the Catholic nun that she saw. It's not that it's an actual spirit moving these things around. It's not that it's a demon, which is what Roger's mother seemed to think. It's psychic energy. It's telekinesis. It's not planned. It's not like, I look at this coaster on the table and I say that I want it to move and it moves. It's an outburst of energy. And what Roll saw and others who have done this research saw was that it tended to cluster around kids on the cusp of or going through puberty. And that was around the age that Roger was. He's about 12 years old. And so, I can't explain how this actually happens. I'm not a physicist. Or a psychologist either one, but the idea that Roll put forward was that these kids were kind of batteries for this energy, but they couldn't control how it was output, and that's it happened and manifested itself through these moving objects and knocks and pings and other phenomenon. But then you also have to take that, if that's what's happening, which is what Roll seemed to think, you have to take that and you have to look at it through the lens of the culture that the Callihans were living in. And so whenever Ori Callihan says that she thinks she sees a spirit of a nun, a Catholic nurse, I think is what she actually said in Roll's book. You kind of wonder, like, why would she see a Catholic? They're Jehovah's Witness, we have to think about the fact that our two big hospitals around here are both Catholic hospitals. We have, on this end of the county, we have King's Daughters, and on the other end, on Moorhead, we have St. Clair. And St. Clair had just come in maybe like 5 years prior to these incidences. These were happening in 68. I think St. Clair came in 63. I'm not sure about King's Daughters, but being Olive Hill, they'd be closer to Moorhead. Wow. And so if she is going to have some sort of hallucination related to this stress and she's going to see a nurse, it's going to be like that's just the image she's going to see. So that's I remember you guys specifically talking about why a Catholic nurse.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably the reason why. She's going to interpret whatever the basis is that all unknown phenomena can only be interpreted through the lens of the known. So when she starts trying to figure out what this is, and maybe it looks like a nurse to her, it's a Catholic nurse because all the nurses she sees are Catholic because she goes to St. Clair when she goes to the hospital.
That makes sense.
And the other time that she says she sees a spirit, it's not the spirit of a person who lived in the house she's in, but the previous house where this all started. And I loved that they used the term knockin' spirits because that, is it's basically a poltergeist. it's a poltergeist means noisy ghost, and a knocking spirit is a spirit that communicates through knocks and bumps, and but that whole thing just traces back to the 19th century, to the Fox sisters, so that was it's interesting that was the term that she had, and it probably had to do with her age, and where they were. But I loved that was that the old man was known to raise knocking spirits, although he was she didn't want to think bad of him because she thought he was a good neighbor.
Right.
So that was all interesting to me, but those things are the Callihan family trying to make sense of whatever's going on. So they're trying to put it in a context that fits, because they don't know anything about psychokinesis. They're trying to put this in the context of their culture and where they are. And there's something that I would love to know that I don't know, that I'm trying to figure out. I've tracked down one of the nieces of Otis Crank. That's a mistake that Roll makes in his book. He calls them Otis and Phyllis Cranks with an S. And it's Crank, no S. He also, I could tell that he had some trouble with the accents. Whenever I'm reading that, I know that she didn't say I see, she said I seen.
Yeah.
I'm convinced that she said I seen. Yeah. And he's just, being the German that he was. Where was I?
Well, I think Otis recently passed away, correct?
Yes, passed away a while back. But I've tracked down one of his nieces, and I'm trying to track down some of the other... Thank you for getting me back on track so smoothly. Trying to track down some of the other family members to verify a few things that I would like to know. I know that the family were Jehovah's Witnesses, but I'm not sure... I had it in my head for some reason that it was a recent thing, that they had recently converted to that faith. And when you combine that with Roger's age, the idea that you change your faith to a faith that no longer celebrates birthdays, no longer celebrates Christmas, no longer celebrates Easter, any of these holidays that are important to a kid at that age, especially, if he'd have been just maybe a little bit older or a lot younger, it wouldn't have impacted him in the same way. But, I wonder how much that, seeing it in the other kids around him at school, seeing what they got to celebrate and got to be involved in, or if it had been recently taken away from him, either one could contribute to this, this inner emotional turmoil that, Roll and other researchers seem to think fuels recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis. Which, is in itself is kind of a crazy concept that, you can move things with your mind, whether you're doing them intentionally or otherwise. But yes, to me, it's just a fascinating case, and I really wish that Helen had allowed Dr. Rowland to take the two older kids, Beverly and Roger, down to North Carolina and do some experiments. It would have been really interesting to see, a little more, because, the chapter in the book is 10 pages.
Yeah.
It's not a lot of information, really, that's why I kind of raised my eyebrows at expert. I'm like, I don't think anybody is really an expert on this. I think there's still a lot of digging to do. And it's why I'm trying to track down some of the folks that are still alive that are interested in talking. And there's actually a gentleman, Randall Bramall, who is wanting to make a documentary about this, a documentary film, and he's a relative of the Callihan family.
We did run onto that when we were doing our research, but it looked like it hadn't really gone anywhere in quite some time, so we weren't sure if that was still on the table or not.
It's still in the works. I messaged him last night to ask how to make sure that I pronounced Ori's name right, because my grandma was Elvalv. And so whenever I read that, I'm like, she's probably Ori, not Aura. And so I got a hold of him to ask to make sure, so that whenever I came on, that I would pronounce it correctly. But yeah, he still has plans for it. It's the same thing that happened to a lot of projects that were in the works before the pandemic.
Right.
Everything just kind of slowed down, people reprioritized, and it's still on his burner. It's just been placed on a back burner, but I'm sure he'll get it bubbling again.
Now, we did receive, and I thought it was interesting, you said people who are willing to talk about it. We did receive a little bit of feedback that, the family wants you to leave this alone. We don't want you to talk about this. They're afraid that if we talk about it, this could bring the occurrences back. And I thought that was kind of an interesting take on it.
Well, and that's not an uncommon thing across paranormal fields. The idea that even in Christianity, in the beginning God was the Word, and you speak things into existence. That's not an uncommon, across the spectrum, and it's a great segue to something else that I've thought about with cases like this and others is the tulpa concept. I first was introduced to that reading, as probably a lot of people were, reading John Keel's Mothman Prophecies, when he talked about the ideas of thought forms. And Nick Redfern, in his book on Slender Man, of all things, has a really, really interesting story he relates of a lady who went to Tibet and studied with the ancient masters, and ended up creating a tulpa that was so strong that it nearly took her own life, trying to get rid of this thing that it just, followed her around forever. And so whether that's, completely in your own mind, like Jung's guides were, or if it's something external that others can see, is either way, it's an interesting phenomenon. And so, that is something that people create with their own minds in the same way. And it's so, is it a self-fulfilling prophecy, or are you really manifesting something? I can't say, but to me it's interesting to study it and to study how people interpret it, within what it is they have to work with.
The psychokinesis theory does connect a lot of dots, and I like that theory, especially the incident where Rogers says the table's going to flip, and then at that moment the table does flip. I thought that was interesting because it's almost like he made it happen. Also,
well, in the family at one point, while Helen's blaming it on demons and Tommy's like, I don't know what's causing it.
Right.
At one point, whenever they want the kids to go to sleep, they're like, Roger, stop it. And they're blaming him, whenever it gets down to it. So.
And then, like you said, if, them just switching religions, if he's upset over that, one of the first incidents was the picture of Jesus falling off the wall and the glass breaking.
Which is what's always led me to think about that. But I don't know for sure when the family... I've heard that Ori became a witness later in life, and I don't know what the order is there. But that, to me, that would be an interesting thing to find out. And it's one of those things that, maybe William Roll would have gotten more into if he'd had the time to take the kids away and talk with them and do a little more studying. But, Helen was really worried that, what they were doing was stirring it up, and it's, that's... maybe you do feed this phenomenon. I can't say. I've wanted to have one of these types of experiences my whole life, and I've never experienced anything. So I'm kind of a dyed-in-the-wool skeptic. But it's funny, everybody else in my family, Bethany, Jessica, they've all experienced something, especially right there at Nan's house. Like Brian, Bethany, Jenny, they will all tell you crazy stories of things that they've seen in that house. But beyond a spooky feeling, because everybody else talks about weird things that happen there, I never, nothing's ever happened to me.
Yeah. What do you think about, did you find anything in your research about the exorcism that they had? That's something that we've tried to find out about, and we've not been able to find anything.
Burn all his clothes.
Yeah, why would they burn?
But it wasn't all of his clothes, it was his new clothes.
New clothes, yes.
New
It was his new
clothes.
clothes.
And, there was another point where Roll mentions earlier that, he had, when he got up at midnight and went to the bathroom, that he'd set out his clothes and smoothed them out. And so, maybe it was anything that I could say would just be presumption. But that was interesting to me that, the idea that maybe his attachment to his clothes or vanity in some way, or if it was something that was attached to the clothes that came in with them. The whole idea we have of haunted dolls and haunted objects. Although that would be, then I would need to know the provenance of the clothes and why they thought that.
Yeah.
And so I'm not clear on any of that, but it is an interesting, the burning in the clothes especially is a really kind of strange.
Well, and I was thinking about the timeline. This started happening in November of 68 and then carried on over into December of 68. So I'm thinking about, okay, when do kids get new clothes? Kids get new clothes usually when they're going to school, and school starts in August. So I thought that was interesting. I wondered what exactly new clothes or where these clothes he came into. If it's, later, several months later, I wouldn't think school clothes. I thought it was a really interesting thing.
And if the exorcism didn't take... I need to look back at the timeline. Because it brings up the whole holidays thing again to me. Like, what if they were Christmas gifts
Yeah.
from somebody outside the...
That's a good thought. I didn't think about
Maybe
that.
maybe that was part of it. That's something that's complete pure conjecture, and this is the kind of thing that's going to make the family really upset, and I'm sorry. I'm apologizing in advance. I'm going to get letters to the newspaper because I did the last time that I ran a story on this. And so, it does upset a few people, and, that's not my intention. My intention is understanding how this fits into Appalachian culture.
Right.
And how the interpretation of it fits into Appalachian culture, and what it says about us as a people. And that just, and when I say that even, it just seems insensitive to the Callaghan family, that that my curiosity is more important than their feelings, and that, and so even as I say it, I'm like, I shouldn't even be here. But it's not going to stop me from asking questions and digging. That's just who I am.
Yeah. I think it's also interesting that, they fled, so obviously something's happening. You're not going to flee your house unless you're having a problem and something's running you out. The fact that when they fled, and where did they go when they fled? Was it to
Zimmerman Hill?
Okay.
They were on Henderson Branch.
No. They moved from, I'm not sure where the original home was, but they moved from that home to Zimmerman Hill, and this is, Ori and John.
And now, is this when they crossed the water?
And then they went to Zimmerman Hill. It was the family. It was Tommy and Helen and the kids that lived on Henderson Branch.
Oh,
Yeah.
Which is Route 2, right through
yeah.
Olive Hill now.
So when they crossed the water and things stopped happening, that, for me, is hard to explain.
Well, that's right out of fairy lore.
Yeah. Well, and it's like...
And the idea that Haints can't follow you across the creek, too.
Exactly. And we brought that up on the podcast. But if it's his psychokinesis, that's what's giving me trouble here, because I really want.
Well, and it did follow them to Henderson Branch eventually.
Okay.
And that's where William Roll and his student John, whose last name is escaping me at the moment. Stump. Thank you. Where him and John Stump witnessed the stuff because they were at the place on Zimmerman Hill, and Helen and Tommy wanted to get the kids home because it was a school night.
Okay.
So they went back down to the house, and John Stump and William Roll asked to go with them to continue asking questions. And that's where everything began happening at the house. And I think that's what got, or Roll thought that's what got Helen really stirred up, was that it had not come into her house before then.
Okay.
And then these guys come to talk to them and follow them down there, and, Stump had the idea that she somehow had the idea that he was in league with the devil.
Yeah.
and causing it to happen and causing it to come to their house there. And that was the first time that it had crossed the water.
Okay.
Well, see, I guess my confusion with that was I was thinking, looking at George Wolfford's article, he had mentioned that Mr. and Mrs. John Callihan had moved from Henderson Branch. So I kind of thought there were two households there on Henderson Branch.
And that's a possibility.
And then they had moved. But I think what Wendy was talking about was when they later moved to Ohio. And crossed the
Ohio River.
Yes.
Yeah. And then at that point, once they crossed the Ohio River, from what we could tell, it kind of all went away.
Okay.
So
I'm sorry. I thought you were talking about Henderson Branch as the creek. And there hadn't been any activity there until William Roll and John Stump came to investigate.
So
and then that was the first time that it followed them. From what I understand, that was the first time that it followed them from Ori and John's house to the to Roger's home.
Yeah.
So I didn't even think about that, crossing the creek.
Yeah.
Because we're not familiar with the area.
Yeah.
So yeah, crossing the creek and it would stop happening. Then you cross the river.
Yeah.
And it would stop again. So that's where, with the psychokinesis, them going to Ohio and not having any more incidents, that's the part that...
And it could just be that he was removed from from certain stressors.
Yeah, that's true.
You know, because Roll said that he had seen that if he took a family member away, that the activity would cease, and then when they went back, it wasn't nearly as
Okay.
bad. So it could have just been as simple as that kind of thing. Just whatever. You know, Roll mentioned several times that Roger wanted to go stay with his grandparents. He preferred
Yeah.
to be up there. And, you know, I'm not sure what the reason why was, but, you know, my stepson gets upset with us and he wants to go stay with his grandma. You know, just because we've made him clean his room or whatever. You know,
Right.
we just make a
Typical
12-year-old do. Yeah. You know, it's a time of, you know, it's an age of, you know, emotions and you don't understand, and everything's an injustice. Everybody's against you. You know, it's just I remember what it was like when I was 12. It was a
Yeah.
long, long time ago, but I kind of remember a little bit. Try to keep that in mind.
Oh, we have 2 teenagers apiece. We remember 12. It wasn't a good year.
No, not at all.
Not a good year.
Yeah, so I mean, you know, it could have just been the change of scenery that made it. And they did eventually come back. Some of them came back at least to the area. So.
Well, I mean, I guess if you think about it, if we go back to the idea of the changing of the faith, maybe what led to this, you know, getting out of that situation where, okay, I have these group of people who knew me before, and now they're trying to see me after, and then they move away to a new place where it's like, okay, this is just who I am. Maybe that kind of takes some of the stress out of that.
Yep, potentially, yeah. That was my thought as well on that one. But again, you know, until we know some more details about this, which is what makes it like, you know, it's a classic case, but there's really very little digging that's been done into it. And it's being right in my backyard, basically.
Yeah.
It's, you know, I feel it's kind of my duty to poke this one with the stick.
Yeah. Well, I hadn't heard anything about this case until we kicked around the idea of starting Haunted Hollers, and
Which I
we're looking
love.
for local stuff. We're having a lot of fun with it.
Yeah, we are.
But I was kind of shocked. I was like, "What? There was a poltergeist in Olive Hill? How have I never heard this story before?" So I thought it was really interesting to dig into it. And one of the things we did have a listener commented on our Facebook page and said, "Oh, you know, what are these people doing now?" And I did some digging, and it was really interesting. If the genealogy and the obituaries and all of that lined up, a lot of the family, you know, passed away early 50s, early in time. And I was kind of like 60s. That's not really that long ago. You know, Roger might still be living, but I think he's not. And I thought that was it was kind of sad seeing, you know, the family and where they moved, and a lot of them stayed over in Ohio, but still had passed away at a young age. Of course, you know, we are talking about healthcare in Appalachia in the, you know.
Well, yeah, I remember that at one point Tommy hollered at Roger to get up and get him his cigarettes.
Yeah.
And I remember my dad doing the same thing, huffing and puffing. I'm out of breath. Go get my cigarettes for me. You know, so it's, you know, it's that culture.
So, Jeremy, when did you first become acquainted with the Callihan story?
I was doing some work for, I was working for the Cited Voice newspaper, and I did a series over there called River Valley Myths and Legends. And it started with places in and around Cited County, and then it spread out to adjacent counties like Adams County and Lawrence County, and eventually I was going up and down the Ohio River Valley and surrounding communities. And I heard about it then. And then I started working on a book on the same theme, and decided to dig a little deeper, and I found a copy of the Pictorial History of Carter County, which had like just a brief synopsis. And from there, I was like, I need to know more. And so I went and got online and found a copy of William Roll's book, you know, actually 1972 first edition. Got it for under $20. And read it, and I'm like, okay, well, why isn't there more? I need more. This is 10 pages. This is such a good story. Why isn't there more? And so that's how I first became acquainted with it. And now I want to dig, but you know, I also want to do it sensitively. And so that's why, you know, whenever I heard that Randall was making a documentary, I offered any support I could give him, you know, because he is part of the family. So I think it's his story to tell, even more so than mine. So, you know, me really, at this point, with the story, I've written about it. If I ever get around to publishing my book, then I will include that in there. But more so, I want to help Randall with his project because I feel like he's the one to tell the story, and I also think that in the day and age we live in, a documentary film about it is probably a better way to reach a broader audience than a little niche local legends book. But I've been interested in this kind of phenomenon since I was a kid, so I've written articles, worked with Bigfoot research groups, found footprints, done field investigations. I've done a little bit of everything, and I'm still a skeptic. But except on Bigfoot, I flipped from 60-40 to 40-60, whether or not it could be real after finding a footprint.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. How did you become interested in the paranormal?
I was the only one in my family that didn't have a paranormal story, that didn't have a paranormal experience. I never seen a UFO, I never seen a Bigfoot, I never saw a ghost. Everybody else in my family had, and I found a book. It's another book I'd like to find again, but when I found it now, it's thousands of dollars, way out of reach. Called Demons, Devils, and Jinns. In the Sunshine Elementary School library of all places. And I loved that book. I was about 9 years old when I found that book, and I just simply devoured it. And the librarian actually sent a note home to my parents. They were concerned that I was reading this book, that I'd checked this book out, and they wanted them to know that I'd gotten it. And my dad, who was into weird stuff, was completely fine with it after he gave it a cursory glance. But yeah, since I was a little kid, and I've gone from being a true believer to a complete and total skeptic to something in the middle. I'm skeptical of most things, and I try to put them in a historical and sociological context, and that's really what interests me more than whether or not they're objectively true and real. Is what they tell us about the human experience and how we interpret things. So, that's the kind of the bell curve of my paranormal life.
So, Jeremy, I know that you are the editor of the paper, and you're into journalism. How did you get interested in writing and writing about these types of experiences?
I have always been a writer, and I think that comes from being an awkward little kid that was shy and bashful, and high school me would not be comfortable in front of a microphone like this. But I was, I always felt like I had something I wanted to say, and I was most comfortable doing that on the page. And so I wanted to be a writer from the time that my mom has stuff from kindergarten where they're like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And it was like, I want to be a writer or a cowboy or an astronaut. And every year, they ask you that in this little book she filled out, and it would change, It's like, I want to be a dentist or a chiropractor or a writer. But the one thing that stayed constant through all of it was writing. And, I even considered education for a while. I was going to be a history teacher, social studies teacher.
I don't want to crush your dreams, but the window might have closed on the astronaut thing.
Yes. I believe it has. My eyesight wouldn't allow it at this point. Although maybe I can make $1 billion and go up in the rocket with Jeff Bezos.
There you go.
No, writer was the consistent thing, and I still didn't think that I could actually do it until I got my first newspaper job with the Portsmouth Daily Times back in the year 2000, 99, 2000. I took my first writing job, and I knew that I wasn't going to do anything else after that. And so, I've not been a journalist this entire time, but for the past 22 years, I've done nothing but write. I've been, a journalist, a magazine writer, a technical writer, or I have worked in some way as an editor for that entire time. And, paranormal stuff was always, I always wanted to write. That's what I wanted to do. Like, if I could do anything, it wouldn't be a newspaper editor, although I wouldn't quit doing that now. It's an important job, and I love doing it, and I love what I provide to the community. But, if I could be like Nick Redfern or Lauren Coleman and just churn out books at the pace those guys do, I totally would. But I also am a little more interested in doing a deeper dive than some of that, surface stuff. And so, I've been able to do that and blend my love of that with journalism to a little bit, like with the River Valley Myths and Legends series. And, I've covered and done reviews of your guys' podcast in my Late to the Games column.
And thank you for that.
Yeah, we appreciate that.
Well, I was excited whenever I found it, because I was considering starting a podcast doing something very similar to what you guys are doing, but I just didn't have the time, to do it the way that it needed to be done. And when I heard what you guys were doing, and then the very first episode was the Olive Hill Poltergeist, I was like, this is awesome. I've got to reach out to these guys. I've got to find them. And I reach out, and it's Logan, who I already know. And, and then I show up here today, and it's Wendy, who I had no idea that because last names change.
Yeah.
I had no idea that, this was the Wendy I knew from, I won't say how many years ago.
Many years ago.
Many years
ago.
When she played ball with my sisters. So, yeah, it's a small world, and writing lets us see that. And so, it brings us all closer together. It allows us to make those connections in a way that other media doesn't, because, you're forced to slow down a little bit when you're reading. And so I've always been a writer.
I love that.
Yes.
And I think that's a really nice place for us to wrap up on today. So, listeners, if you have any feedback that you want to send our way, we would love to hear it. You can contact us on Facebook and Instagram at Haunted Hollers. You can also send us an email at hauntedhollers@gmail.com. And we also have a webpage, www.hauntedhollers.com. Hey listeners, if you're enjoying the podcast, we would love to hear what you think. If you wouldn't mind, stop by Apple Podcast or Spotify or wherever you get your podcast and leave us a rating and a review.
Until next time, listeners, beware of things lurking in the shadows.